Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the Play One of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. I enjoy play. Computer games are my go-to. However, play feels like a relatively new concept in learning and development, and we wanted to learn more. To help us, we have three superb guests. Our first guest is Sarah Filman. Sarah playfully unlocks personal and professional growth as a leadership coach, facilitator and improviser. Drawing on her experience as a people leader and product manager in tech and education nonprofits, she founded Playful Perspectives. Their mission is to help leaders and teams connect, create and thrive by dissolving the work-play divide. Our second guest is Natalie Ann Holborough. Natalie is a content marketing manager at Synergy Learning, a tutor at NUJ Wales and a writer from Wales in the UK. As a multi-award-winning author, her writing residencies with the British Council, Literature Wales and Cultivera have seen her writing and performing poetry in Wales, Ireland, Sweden and India. She's the author of And Suddenly You Find Yourself, Small and Little Universe. Our final guest is Mina Taylor. Mina is the founder of Energize Your Voice and the author of The Confident Body. Beginning her career as an accident reduction specialist, Mina went on to transfer her theatre training to developing an innovative approach for professional development. Some of her notable clients include TikTok, Red Bull, Uber and EY. Recorded at the start of January 2025, this is a great conversation, so please do just settle back and have a listen. This is Women Talking About Learning. This is Sarah, Natalie and Mina talking about play.
Hi, Nat. Hi, Minna. Where are you all calling in from?
I'm coming from Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
And I'm from Swansea in South Wales.
Wonderful. I'm joining from Boston, Massachusetts in the United States. So it's nice to be connected across the Atlantic with you.
Yeah, I think it's what's always fun for me, especially in the realm of play, because it's sort of this emergent new sort of landscape for people to explore, is finding this global community of especially women who are starting to access it in really powerful ways. And I just love it. I love that we can all be here in conversation. Thanks, Internet.
I was having a nose at both your LinkedIn profiles, actually. I could see play in both of your tags, so I'd love to know more about what you both do. Because I assumed that you knew each other for some reason. I was like, oh, they both must work in the same place. But no, this is much bigger than that.
Yeah, it's global, baby. Come on now.
Minna, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. Yeah, play is everywhere. Let me give you some context, just sort of general context, which is my background is as an actress. So I trained both an undergraduate and graduate training for my acting. And then I sort of transitioned that into corporate learning and development. But how I shifted acting into corporate learning and development was really coming in through the lens of play. Because so the way that I approach play is really behavioral. So it's thinking about it as that intangible space of unpredictability and aliveness, that moment before you go, right? The moment when you come up to the precipice of decision to say yes or no. And in acting, that's really what it is, right? It's listening and responding, which is at the foundation of play. And really being able to live in that space of unpredictability and sort of being adaptable and agile with one another, responsive and co-creative. And so that was, almost 2 decades ago that I started doing this work in a professional capacity. So it's really taken on a really interesting evolution, but that's sort of how I come at it. And that's what I'm working on.
Awesome. What about you, Sarah?
Yeah, it's fantastic. I come from a background in the tech world. So I studied computer science. I was an applied math and computer science major, was working at Microsoft, kind of in the product management space, but I was always drawn to the group dynamic. So even though I worked on product, I was more obsessed with the people and the processes we were using to work together. And so as I transitioned into management and leadership, was focusing so much on the group I had been like a camp counselor in my youth. I worked at a toy store. So there was always this like playful essence to me that I brought to everything. And I just saw how important it was for people to do their best work, to feel like they belonged on the team, like they had a place on it. And that kind of became my management ethos. I then transitioned to education nonprofit where I got the opportunity to kind of hone my facilitation skills. We were working with teachers to help them bring computer science to kindergarten through 12th grade. So I was then in a position to run workshops for teachers. So in these professional learning settings, helping teachers who had perhaps never studied computer science figure out how to do that. And computer science is actually a very playful area as well. It doesn't seem like it because it seems like it would be very logical, but there's a ton of creativity there because you're making something out of building blocks of code. After that experience, I kind of pulled together what I wanted to do with the next chapter of my career and pulled out kind of improv, which I had started with. So, we have kind of a connection of the theater there, improv and leading groups and growth and personal and professional development. And then combining that with when I feel the most joy and electricity in my life is when I am being playful. So I have been weaving that together into my own practice, working with organizations, working with individuals as a coach and facilitator. So that's kind of how I've come to it. And then also just to tie back to the global nature, one of the things that I found in 2020 was an organization that had just started called the Global Play Brigade that started during the pandemic to connect people in this time of fear and loneliness using play. So it's a bunch of play practitioners, activists, therapists, clowns. And I found just an incredible worldwide community through that. And that really expanded my understanding of play as play and development as well.
Oh, I'm obsessed with that. I'm like, I need to look into that community.
Please
Now
do. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, for sure.
So it sounds like you've both had that light bulb moment around play as well, which is in totally different ways. But I completely understand that when you're saying you had a joy from it and it lights you up, that hit me as well. So I started out as Subway's worst sandwich artist briefly. But after that, I got into, a few years later, I got into learning technology space, started in instructional design, and then went into content marketing. And that it allowed me to be more creative. So I'm a writer as well. So when I'm not writing books, I'm also teaching workshops, sometimes to kids, sometimes to adults, more often to adults. But I noticed there's such a difference between running workshops with children and running workshops with adults. The confidence in adults, they're the ones who'll say, I'm not creative, or I can't play, or I can't think of ideas. Whereas if you're taking it with kids, they don't care what work they produce. They're just enjoying the process. And I'm reading Rick Rubin's book at the moment, and there's a quote in there, and it says, we don't play to win, we play to play. And I try and remind people of that. So whenever I'm doing mentoring sessions, and it's often women that come to me and say that they're not able to write, and they used to be able to write, perhaps they've got too many commitments now, perhaps they don't give themselves permission to play. But it's about reminding people that, yes, you can. It's not that you're not creative. You need to give yourself permission, and also not aim to be perfect all the time. It's trying to pull that away so that you start to get your best ideas. I think there's a lot of undoing around that. So it might have been school that forced you to get, good grades, and then you start to feel a little bit humiliated if you get something wrong in the workplace, especially if you're a woman. And it's trying to unpick all those beliefs again. So I'd be really interested to see what you're both doing as well in the workplace around that. Do you get that experience as well, that nervousness around it?
Oh, it's
to share ideas.
It's huge. It's huge. It's like when I first started really doing corporate learning and development in a major way, specifically around play, specifically with women. It's their workshop I designed for this conference in Amsterdam, actually, called Empowered Play. And it was specifically because women were like, the undoing, I think, Nat, that's such a spot on word for it. And in the work that I do and the way that I was trained, we call it conscious redirection of use. which is about understanding our unconscious behavior patterns that limit the ways in which we show up in critical and consequential spaces, specifically around the utilization of voice and our ability to engage with one another meaningfully. And so we develop these relational patterns. They move into unconscious territory. We then need to move them into conscious territory to then sort of address them head on. And play is obviously a low stakes way to explore that. But there's a lot around perfection. There's a lot around saying the right thing. So and saying it in the right way, yes, but saying the right thing, fearing looking foolish. And I'm actually curious to know from you all what you think about this, like the consequence of failure. For me, I'm like, fail forward. Play is the experience of failure. Like, we cannot live in the landscape of perfection if we seek to play. But the consequence of failure feels so strong. What have you all sort of seen with that, or experienced or heard? Because it seems to be this global thing that I can't quite put my finger on why it exists specifically, or maybe more in women than it tends to in men, if we're thinking in a binary way.
I really think of play as very countercultural for many of especially in a corporate culture, because the need to know. I need to know things. Not knowing is very scary. You need to know things. This desire for certainty, this fear of failure, that there's one right answer, that it's the outcome that matters, and that you were talking about play being this process, right? We're trained that the outcome is what matters. It's the A on your test. It's not the learning that got you there. And I do find so fascinating when I go into workspaces as well. Play creates kind of this microcosm, this container that mirrors how people feel on the outside, right? If you're nervous to speak up, even in these low stakes, who cares games, what is happening in that higher stakes meeting? And I think, Minna, you were talking about, like, it's the same, it's us in both of those spaces showing up. Yeah, but I know it got big, but I was like societal, like it just, we're always looking for that right answer, and play becomes kind of this antidote for that can be very scary.
Which is interesting, because when I think about the tech industry, maybe you all can speak to this more than I can, because I'm merely a consultant. I've never actually worked in a tech company. But I have consulted for many a tech company, especially like high-level venture-backed companies. And there's like move fast and break things, fail forward. But these are like super categorically very male-dominated spaces, male-led spaces. And so the ethos is one of fail fast. However, Sarah, I really like your sort of thinking about this. Like, it's sort of this like looming energy of, at least in my experience in the women I work with, of like, but we can't do that. That's not something that we are fostered to adopt behaviorally.
No, I completely agree with you. I mean, you've got that pressure all the time, especially if you're a woman in a leadership role. You might have to show these behaviors that show that you're competent and you're capable all the time. And if you try and show any behaviors that seem like they're a little bit more playful, like you're willing to fail, that could be perceived as not taking your job seriously. So I think it's a lot more difficult, and we take that for granted. And it's interesting that you mentioned it is tech companies that do it. So I know that Google do, I think it's called failure postmortems or something, where when they have failure, they kind of reframe it by looking at what they learned from that. And I think that's a great concept, but it needs to be in the culture, and it needs to be inclusive for everyone. Tech spaces are male dominated, and we need that sort of psychological safety there that tells women as well, I'm included and I'm okay to fail in this space. I won't feel humiliated for speaking up. What have you seen in terms of culture? What are the barriers there?
I think you hit on something, that play is seen, I think, by default as not serious. I think play is very sincere. but it's not the opposite of serious. And so I think that that's a barrier, right? Like play gets relegated to, oh, let's do this morale event over here. We'll go out for drinks. We'll go play mini golf. And it's not seen as a serious tool to support communication and collaboration. But I think that especially, I agree, like there's in the workplace this desire to display competence and competence and seriousness get very braided together, so that if you're bringing playful, it starts to maybe feel like it's sabotaging the people's perception of you as competent, and detangling that is so important, right? Yeah.
Yes. 100%. Yeah, I like to say, like, I take play very seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I think play, we tend to equate play with silliness. But again, play at its core is listening and responding. It's adaptability. It's strategic problem solving. It's the imagination. It's like, and if we think about this sort of from an organizational development perspective and the impact it can ultimately have on business outcomes, because I've dealt with this sort of like, oh, we'll put play over in the corner, right? Especially when I'm coming in to teach public speaking or storytelling or anything like that. And they're like, oh, we'll do this one as like a fun one. And I'm like, no, this is the one.
This is the work.
Not mine necessarily.
This is the work.
This is the work. Yeah. Because it's like when we are most at ease is when we are at play. When we are at ease, our cognitive function elevates tremendously. Our ability to listen and co-create, collaborate, and innovate, think creatively, increases dramatically. Our ability to feel at ease in client interactions, feel at ease when speaking to high-level stakeholders. Play is the conditioning of the body to rise to the occasion, but it lowers the consequence in moments that we might otherwise be prone to define as risky.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. Like with the collaboration especially, it's that conversation that you can have. It's that safety that you can challenge things, but it just means you're being curious rather than sort of defensive. And the more you challenge things and ask questions, the more innovative ideas and more creativity is going to come out of it. And again, it's about feeling safe to do that.
The experience of safety, I'm curious about that, because I'm like, that is also like in play. When we feel playful, that conditions the body to like live on the precipice of uncertainty, of not knowing. Again, that intangible space of unpredictability. It's like if we can actually live in that space consistently, what are the fruits of that process and practice?
Yeah, I mean, one of the sometimes when people react to play and they say, oh, I don't know how to do that, I'm not good at that, I offer up other words like, an experimental mindset, or have you ever found yourself in flow, or that kind of thing. But regardless of what it is, I think one of the powers is what you're talking about, Minna, of like, I had a clown mentor who talked about don't step out of don't step out of your comfort zone, grow your comfort zone. And I think that that's what happens when call it flow, call it a willingness to experiment, play. You are expanding, you are being willing to step beyond the status quo. You're kind of at that edge, that precipice of what's challenging for you, right? Because if something's super boring, we don't really consider it play. So it has to be challenging, but within the reach of our capability. And then that's where we're in this like zone of being able to grow and learn, and then through that expand our capacity.
It's funny you mentioned the word play. I'll give you a personal anecdote, which is whenever my dad tries to talk to me about what I do, he's like, I still don't know if play is the right word. I don't know what it means. And I'm like, but that's the thing is, it is so deeply intuitive. We do know what it means. I think if we step back into its most essential qualities, we're most at ease when we're at play, like in flow, right? When we're invested in gameplay, when we are present in gameplay, we're in flow, which essentially means a surrendering of the conscious mind or self-conscious mind, which allows us to focus explicitly on the matter at hand. And if we zoom out and think about it, but yeah, it's like the redefinition. My dad, somebody's like, yeah, don't call it play. I'm like, but it is play.
Mhm.
It is play. And I like to hear that you're also sort of getting that pushback, because I'm like, I want us to adopt this colloquially. I want us to really get on board with it as an essential business term, especially for learning, and especially for women. Yeah, the best leaders are the ones that are willing to feel foolish and fail publicly, which is obviously vulnerable. It confronts the ego, all of those things. But play is such an essential practice in that end. Whether you're doing something like coding, right? Giving yourself not only the play of the code itself, but also the play of the experimentation of coding. Yeah, just de-escalating that a little bit. But maybe we need to retitle it, but I'm sticking to my guns on this.
No, I think you should. It's interesting that you both get in a pushback on it, because I've realized I've done it unconsciously. So I've never put play into any of my workshop titles because I know I'll get pushback. So I said, oh, be in writer's block, or oh, how to be more creative, how to be a creative block. But it's actually teaching people how to play, because at the start of a session, I will say, we're going to play with ideas. I don't want you to take this as something you need to be perfect at. I don't want you to have a finished work at the end. I just want you to play with ideas. So I think we do need to embrace that word more and completely change people's perceptions about it.
Mhm.
Are you seeing that start to happen at all?
I've made it my personal mission. So I think within the sphere of people that I interact with, I've been really trying to expand what they think of as play more to some of the words we've said. It's about experimentation, openness, curiosity. And then also before we jumped on the recording, I mentioned this play personalities, which I think could be a good time to introduce it. So there's a
Let's go. Yeah, I'm
so there's a
curious.
play
You
researcher
figure out.
named Dr. Stuart Brown who has identified that there are 8 play personalities. Most often these connect with like how we like to play as a kid, but that doesn't always resonate with everybody. Many people resonate with many of these play personalities, but I'll read them aloud, and I'd love to hear from both of you like what resonates. So you've got the artist or creator. They delight in making things and expressing creativity. You've got the competitor, who thrives on games and the thrill of victory. Third is the explorer, who loves to seek out new experiences and discover new things. The fourth is the kinesthete, who finds joy in movement and physical activities. The collector is fifth, finds pleasure in gathering and curating objects or experiences. The director enjoys planning and organizing play for others. The joker enjoys nonsense, lighthearted play, and making others laugh. And the storyteller loves to imagine, create narratives, and live in other worlds.
Does he offer a matrix in terms of combinations of these different personality archetypes of play, or does it fall in? This is all new to me.
Yeah.
I'm like so curious now. Is it sort of this idea that we fall into a certain camp, or do we have maybe elements of a few?
Yeah, great question. So my understanding of it is that it's not at all like, like the MBTI quiz, or you don't like take a quiz and then it pops out with like, here's, it's not a BuzzFeed quiz or whatever. And I think you might resonate with like one really strongly or a few, or I've worked with people who are like, I resonate with all of them. To me, it's more of a framework to be able to, back to what we were talking about, expand that definition of what play is. Because I don't think necessarily people say, oh, well, I love reading, but I'm not playful. It's like, well, but does your imagination come alive when you're reading a story? Do you feel and flow? So getting back around to your question, I think it's more of a framework, but not like, it's not strict buckets or strict combinations, is my understanding.
No. Yeah. Okay. It's not like a human design thing. And who's the person that did this
Dr.
again? I'm
Stuart
curious.
Brown.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. He wrote play.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So I'm curious, like, Nat, I saw you like nod your head when I read a couple of them. Did any of them stand out for you of like how you really like to play?
I love the range that you had, because for me, it's like a light bulb moment just went off. I was like, do you know, the next time someone pushes back and says, I can't play, I've forgotten how to play, you've got such a range of personality types, and then play character, what were they
Play
called again?
personalities.
Play personalities. I love that. So it just shows how everyone has got it in them and how it's their strength. For me, I think the artist and is it a storyteller one at the end? Those two appeals, but I just love that you had even like competitiveness. You had like, is it director? The other one?
Director loves to kind of, it's
yeah.
the one who's like, you go over there, you do this, but loves it, right?
Yeah. You don't typically associate that with play, do you? But yeah, it's a great example. I'm going to have to look all this up. It looks great.
Yeah. Like I have a friend who she loves planning vacations for like her group of friends, right? The person who loves saying like, here's our itinerary, here's what's going to happen. I imagine a bunch of folks who are like facilitators maybe play in that way as well, of like kind of directing an experience.
And I think what's also interesting, like taking this sort of vacation example, first of all, because the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, I was like, I am so grateful that there are people like that, because that is not my zone of genius. But then it also leads me to sort of thinking about play on a collaborative perspective, which is all these various archetypes. Let's take like the storyteller, right? Nat, if you're like, yes, I like really resonate with that. Like combining them together, almost thinking about it like, if we think about a game, if we think about, and I don't know how familiar you all are with sort of the finite or infinite game theory.
A bit,
Do you know about
yeah.
this? Okay. So, no, you don't, Nat? Or you
I
do?
don't know.
Okay. Super briefly, finite game is a game that is played to be won. So there's a terminant end point, oftentimes played in short sprints. Infinite game is a game that is played with the purpose of perpetuating gameplay. So how do we play the game in a way that allows it to last indefinitely? And so if we think about sort of the play space of collaboration and these various archetypes, with this infinite game in mind, even the finite game in mind, because we do need finite games, even in organizational systems, they are tremendously beneficial for things like quarterly earnings. But how can we sort of leverage the different aspects of people who are directors, who are storytellers, who like to think imaginatively, and really optimize what that means to play fully, which of course for women means give yourself permission to be unabashedly playful, which I think is where there can be some resistance, again, going back to this idea of failure and judgment and saying you're doing the wrong thing.
I love that, Minna. Gathering my thoughts.
Me too. I just 100% agree.
Yeah, it's I don't know how you all feel, but I just kind of feel like even, of course it's learning, but I think, and again, Sarah, going back to something, it's like unlearning. Like, how do we unlearn these habits that we've created and go back? Like, play is the first thing we learn how to do. It is literally the action of confidence and connection. It's the first thing we learn how to do. And it's the first thing that we let go of as soon as we become aware of the fact that we need to be cool or that we need to do things in the right way. And I'm like, it is in us. It is so in us. It is deeply, deeply inside of us. And if we get out of our own way, play is waiting for us. Play is waiting for us. And it is a thing that will allow us to like step into spaces in the most powerful way that we can potentially not even currently imagine.
And that's why I think play is so serious, like to really expand it. If the status quo is not working for many people, and it does not work for many people, we have to be capable to imagine something different. And if that imagination is a muscle that we can build and practice through play. And so it really is like, how are we going to change the world? We are going to change the world through play.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That is why it's like it's the most serious.
It's
It's the most serious. And what we're the current version of work keeps us stuck in the status quo, which is not working for a lot of people. It is working for some.
Because it's finite gameplay.
Yes.
It's finite gameplay, but we don't look at it in a playful way. So we're asking people to play this finite game over and over and over again, but the stakes are so high and the fear of failure is so real and the consequences are so real that it's not sustainable. But if we ask them to play in a playful way, then it completely changes the game entirely. It makes it sustainable and more effective in the long term. But that is, I love that you said that. Yes. Can we change the world? Yes, through play. It's serious. Yeah. Let's go to the UN. I feel like we're developing a platform.
The UN has the UN declared like an International Day of Play? There is an International Day of Play. And I can't remember, but maybe it's one of the development goals that it's optimized for like children having like the right to play. And one of the Global Play Brigade's missions is to expand that. It's a human right to play, adults, children, everybody to play. But we should definitely be throwing our weight behind that for sure, Minna.
Because adults, it's almost like we see play or learning as a chore, right? You find learning really hard, and play is really hard to get back into. But you watch kids learning things, and they're like, trying to use a knife and fork, they're throwing spaghetti into their head. They don't mind. They'll keep going. They'll keep learning. And when you're an adult, then you're just going, okay, you get one thing wrong. Oh, it's not for me. It's just, I tried it. It's not for me, so I'm not going to try it again. Like, imagine like if people just didn't take things as seriously, like you said, it would change the world to be able to just let go of that sort of self-consciousness. It's just trying to remember what it was like, and it's very difficult as an adult.
It is. Yeah. And I know there was an episode on improv and training. This question that we've been coming back to of what's the community like? How can it be safe to try again? What is the culture around you that needs that to be true? Because it's very hard to be a single person swimming up, this countercultural stream with play. And so how do you create cultures where other people are creating that safety with you so that it is safe to try again and you want to try again, and you want to play that infinite game of how do we keep trying? How do we, yeah.
And then I think I love this idea of embedding it into culture. This also leads me sort of, and I know this is a hot topic right now in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but when I think about it as sort of cultural, there's also ways in which people play that does not foster collaborative gameplay. So there's hyper competitiveness, and I think competitiveness can be an important aspect of play for sure. In number 2 on the list, competitor, right? When I think it's sort of this like win at all cost, dominate, manipulate, find ways to undermine your colleagues, then I think it can sort of like more deeply embed toxic cultures. And so then it becomes a matter of how do we collectively, as an organization, as a culture, socially, governmentally, from a policy perspective, define play in such explicit terms that it also denotes things like kindness, sportsmanship, sort of these things that challenge us to think not only about how we're playing, but how we play well with others.
Play to me is kind of like love. Like you can't force somebody to play. Just like you can't force somebody to love something, right? So, yeah, if there's this dominant, like play, I think a lot of people dissociate or want to distance themselves because it's so tied up with this competitiveness. But I think one of the things the play personality framework helped me understand is like, of course, not everybody feels playful when they're in that competitive mode. So, yeah, you can't force you can't coerce someone to play.
I love that.
It's not truly play to them. And so if you're only playing one type of game and it only is appealing to certain ways of playing, then it's only appealing to certain types of people, because play is not like how we play is not universal.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but I think you're spot on.
Yeah, the inclusivity of gameplay. What does sort of that mean to have voices heard, people contribute, and in what ways, toward what end, and for how long?
Yeah. And minute to what you were saying earlier too, of at what cost, right? Like this outcome versus process. If you win, but along the way, if you quote win, but everybody's burnt out, wants to quit, like you've achieved your goal, but the relationships are broken, trust is broken, like you've maybe won in some sense, but it really depends on how you're defining success. I think one of the things I love about play is that it defines the process, the how is baked into what success is, because if it's not playful along the way, then it's not successful. Even if you won, quote, won the game, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we saw this at the outcome of COVID. It's people are feeling so overworked, so overtaxed. The landscape of work is shifting. The responsibilities of employees are shifting. People are no longer incentivized to stick around, or if they feel like the stakes are maybe losing their job, then they'll do it at all costs. But then you're going to have burnout, you're going to have people leaving, retention rates are going to low, there's huge attrition. And then when it comes to sort of, and I don't even know if this is possible. I'm actually curious what you all think about this in terms of the future of work and industry, but sort of to have these legacy employees, to have people that stay with an organization, let's say 5 years, right, conservatively. What does it take to do that? What does it take to keep people there in a way that's not only based on salary incentive, but incentive of what they are generating personally, internally, when they're involved in their workflow? Does it feel taxing or does it feel generative?
Minna, that reminds me of a quote by Jill Vialet, who founded Playworks, of play matters because people matter. Like you have to be focused on those relationships along the way to sustain us.
So that process where you mentioned if you're playing to win, but you feel burnt out in the process, you haven't actually won. But I think using the word winner, even, it's kind of in the workplace, you think there are only certain people who can win. There's only certain people at the top. And it's about sort of changing that so that the game becomes the fulfillment. It's a difficult thing. It's a cultural thing, isn't it? Like, how do we shift the focus from just achieving things on paper and feeling fulfilled in what we're doing every day and what we're contributing, and how do we sort of send the message to people that what they're doing is actually making a difference and that they count?
Yeah. I'm curious for both of you, like, have you seen some of those aha moments with people where they've gotten that, it sounds like that, yes, for you, like they've gotten that permission to maybe fail, but I would love to hear if you have like an anecdote or a story of where you've seen that shift in somebody or a group of people.
This pops up in mentoring more than anything, because people come in and straight away, especially when we'll apologize before they've even shared anything, they're going to apologize about their work. Sorry, it's rubbish. Sorry, I didn't have time to do it. Sorry, I haven't done this for ages. And I was telling them, you don't need to apologize. And it's when you slowly work on that confidence, saying, no, you're allowed to write what you want to write. You're allowed to use your voice. You're allowed to fail. Like, what you're doing is not failure. You're just experimenting. You're seeing now what's working for you, what's not, what you're enjoying, what you don't enjoy. When they stop sort of feeling that they're doing something wrong or that they are wrong, that's when you sort of get the best out of them. And that's when they start to have fun with it. So they're just going into it. They're making it a habit, a routine, because that sort of barrier isn't there anymore. They're not getting into it and thinking, I'm instantly going to fail. They're going, no, I'm just going to enjoy this and just see where it takes me. What about you, Minna? Where do you see it?
As you're saying this, I'm thinking I was at this event for a Gender and Policy Center at a university. And one woman, a woman who was speaking, she was just talking about failure. And she was like, She was like, sometimes when I'm just feeling like I can't perform, or like I don't know what I'm doing, I just go in and I say, I'm going to win the Oscar for like the biggest failure, and sort of shifts the language around it.
I love
And I was
that.
like, oh yeah, I know. I love that too. Right. It's so cool. So that was an aha for me. I think what I see for ahas and a client example is coming to my mind immediately, which echoes an experience that I see repeat itself, which is I was working with this woman, and she was in ad sales for a major media company, and her numbers were really declining. So she wasn't hitting her targets. And so she engaged me and said, how can I sort of get to do better? I need to do better. Like, my job is online. And so we go over the sales deck. They have, like every company, a basic standard sales deck. And I was like, she presented, I said, well, what would happen if you just, told a story here? Like, what if you added in a little storytelling or made it feel a little bit more personal? And this was her response. I can do that.
No.
And literally and I see this in women a lot, where we create rules for ourselves based on assumption that haven't been explicitly defined, but we create constraint that don't exist. And so we already set ourselves up to be limited in the ways in which we can imagine, create, take chances, and expose ourselves to risk.
Yeah, that making assumptions, I feel like it ties it all together, right? The assumptions, the way we're walking around the world, that is our status quo, and a willingness to pause and say, what if it wasn't that way? What rules am I just assuming by default? What can I play with? Which of these rules that seem like they're totally set in stone, calcified, concrete, are actually softer than they think they are? It's eye-opening for people, because I think once you have that lens on, you start to look through everything through that playful lens, and suddenly everything can be played with.
Let's wrap this up. What's a key takeaway? I'm curious, like the key takeaway or the key thing that maybe like someone shared in the conversation, or like something that like you're like, okay, whoever is listening to this, like, remember.
I think for me, from speaking to both of you, it's that play is a serious business, and that play can change the world, I think, was my favorite quote from this one. I could carry on this conversation, honestly, because I feel really inspired after it. I feel like we've played for 40 minutes. It's nice.
Agreed. Yeah, I've loved all the different frameworks offered. Like, I definitely want to look more into like the finite infinite games. I'd heard of it, but I want more. And it seems like you're also coming with a lot of different like organizational development frameworks that I'm curious about. And if I imagine if somebody listening might be as well too.
Sarah, love what you just said. Sort of, how can we keep a playful mindset, even if we're not sure how to practice play right away? It's sort of carrying with us this continuous question of, I wonder what would happen if.
What if?
What if? Yeah, exactly. What if? Why not? What is possible?
Thank you both. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks both.
We're incredibly lucky to have Sarah, Natalie and Mina sharing their approach to play within L&D, and we're sure you've gained some newfound techniques and appreciation for what they do. Do let us know what you think. A massive thank you to them for their time, and you'll find all their details, along with links to the things they spoke about, in the show notes. We're always on the lookout for guests, so if you'd like to take part, please do let us know. Again, all the details are in the show notes. We're back in a couple of weeks, and next time it's the written submissions one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.